Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting on Tuesday, October 1st, 2019, 6:30 PM here at the McAuliffe Hearing Room. All selectmen are present except for Ms. Braccio. With the public hearing that we have and other board member availabilities, I'm going to kind of mix around on the agenda. I am going to start with the 6:30 PM hearing. Application for transfer of package store all alcohol license from Eastbrook, Inc., doing business as Sperry's Liquors, to Kishner Corp. Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, notice is hereby given under Chapter 138 of the Massachusetts General Laws that Kishner Corporation, DBA Sperry's Liquors and Market, has applied for a transfer of an annual package store all alcoholic beverages license currently held by Eastbrook Incorporated, DBA Sperry's Liquors and Market, located at 205 Turnpike Road, Southborough, Mass. Described 3,013 square feet, 4 doors, 1 extra storage room of 313 square feet, rear delivery, 1 18-door cooler, 3 counters, wine racks, and 3 small coolers. Proposed manager on record is Mihir Patel. Public hearing will be held by the Board of Selectmen acting as the local license authority in the Thomas W. McAuliffe Hearing Room, second floor of the Townhouse, 17 Common Street, Southborough, Mass. On Tuesday, October 1st, 2019, at 6:30 PM, Southborough Board of Selectmen Licensing Authority.
Very good. And that notice has been advertised?
Notice was advertised in Metro West Daily News on September 17th.
Okay. And I assume we have the applicants here?
Mr. Chairman,
Actually, if you could just get to where you can use a microphone. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Douglas Rowan. I'm an attorney in Marlborough, and I represent Mr. and Mrs. Patel, who reside at 88 Lodi Road in Marlborough. They have an 8-year-old son that's in the school system in Marlborough and 2 daughters that are at UMass Dartmouth in Dartmouth. They hope to have a seamless transition of the present operating Sperry's Market, which is kind of a corner store, liquor store, as well as, serving some food and having a small market there. It's an existing business that Mr. Speranzeller, they reached an agreement. The application that we submitted, if I could make a oral amendment to section 12, where Mihir Patel is listed as the manager, and under B of that, there was an error in that that we marked that he had a prior military record or federal crime record, and we had marked yes, and I think the Corey results will show that he does not have a criminal record of any kind, and if that could be amended to no, I would appreciate it for the purposes of the record. Mihir is here, and he will be the full-time manager of the store. His wife, Mary, owns and shares with him the corporation, and she is the corporate officer. But they intend to work the business together, and although he will be there the majority of the time. We're prepared to answer any questions that the board may have.
Good. Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Mr. Stivers.
Just curious, experience with operating this kind of a business?
Yes,
Actually, if you could go to the microphone as well, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I had a business for 10 years in North Carolina. And then my brother has a business here in Chicopee, Mass. Been going there for a long time. And he's got a full liquor store over there.
Did the North Carolina business sell liquor as well?
Beer and wine.
Okay, all right.
Just the liquor part wasn't there, but
Okay,
beer
thank
and
you.
wine.
I don't have anything. Application looked in order.
Seems to be. Mr. Kalenda?
No, I would just
Anything?
make a motion that we vote to approve the.
Yep.
I would make a
But
motion.
actually,
Ooh,
I think we need to see if there's any
Okay.
other comments first
Nothing
and close
further?
the public hearing, and then we'll entertain the motion. So, anybody from the public with a comment? Seeing none, I'll move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Move seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public hearing is closed. Mr. Kalenda.
I would move that we approve the application to transfer the package store all alcohol liquor license from Eastbrook Inc., DBA Spirits Liquors, to Kishna Corp.
I'll second.
Motion was moved seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, thank you for doing business in
Congratulations.
Southborough.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Welcome to Southborough, sir.
Next, Board of Health update on the Triple E. Mr. Pazinski. Ms. Chamberlain as well, sorry.
Hello.
You?
Good evening. You probably know me, but for the record, Paul Pasinski, the current Public Health Director. I brought Leslie Chamberlain, our Public Health Nurse, who is here to give you some update on the actual Triple E disease, if you will, and any aspects, any questions you might have on that aspect. As far as the mosquito situation goes, and I guess that's what you're asking us to give you an update on, I checked with Tim Deschamps, who is the director of the mosquito control project, which Southborough, I'm glad to say, has been a long-standing member, charter member of that district, going back many years. He indicated that they are still collecting traps in Southborough in various locations. They usually don't tell you where those locations are. They don't want vandals going in there and disturbing their traps. But that the species that carry Triple E and West Nile virus have been found in some of those traps. They continue to send them into the state, but it's diminishing, and it's basically, at this point in time, slowing down because of the weather getting a little cooler. But until we get that 1 day of 24 hours or 12 hours at least, minimum of a deep freeze, we can't consider ourselves safe. They usually, the policies that have been issued from DPH call for 2 days, 2 consecutive days. It's inclusive as to whether it's consecutive in my estimation. But anyway, 2 days of deep freeze, that is below freezing weather. When we had a situation back several years ago, when we had the West Nile virus, we closed down all the public lands for people entering after the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. At that time, Dr. Louis Faison, when we had some freezing conditions in October, tried to figure out whether or not we could open up or we could declare that these lands are then available for the public. Ironically, he ran into several microclimatological issues, talking with various officials from the state, and that certain places, like up on the top of Windermere, Overlook, some of the hills were not below freezing. Some of the valley areas, lowlands, were below freezing, 28. So it was kind of a mixed bag. And they waited until we got an official declaration from the state that they were satisfied that there was no mosquitoes with West Nile virus. So I'm not sure if the same thing will hold true this time, but we'll wait and see. That's all I have, unless you have questions.
Ms. Chamberlain, anything else, or?
Before you do,
Sure.
who makes that call? Is it a local Board of Health call? Is it your call? Is it the
It's
state?
Department of Public Health,
At the state level?
yes.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
I was just going to give a quick review. Eastern equine encephalitis, as we all probably are aware at this point, is a very rare viral infection of the brain. And 50% of the people that acquire that usually die, and the remaining don't fully recover generally. They have neurological sequelae that, impacts them. As we know, birds carry the virus. They are immune. The mosquitoes sting the birds, pick up the virus, and then can transmit it to humans and horses and other hooved animals like llamas. To date, there have been 425 mosquito samples that tested positive in Massachusetts, and of that, 12 people and 8 animals have been infected with the virus. 3 people have died. Let's see, this is one of the most active years for EEE since 50 years ago. And it runs, in cycles of 10 to 20 years. But in this case, this has been the most active year that we've had in 50 years. At this point in time, there are 35 communities in the state that are still at critical risk, 46 communities at high risk, and 122 that have been identified as moderate risk. Southborough still is at critical risk. So at this point, it still goes forward with the personal protective measures being the most effective way, with the long sleeves. Of course, I have short sleeves, but long sleeve. But I sprayed, no. Long sleeves, long pants, the spray, and staying inside between the dusk and dawn hours. Were there any questions?
Mr. Kalenda?
Any samples taken from Southborough, or mosquitoes identified in Southborough as having the virus?
There were mosquitoes identified
do you know?
in 3 or 4 traps, right,
Yeah.
Paul?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No people, fortunately, but the
Right.
traps, yes.
No horses, people yet in Southborough, but
But we don't know where those traps,
no, we don't know where those traps are. They don't like to disclose that
okay.
for various reasons. I guess they could if somebody really,
Do you know how many total traps they have in town? Do they disclose that information?
I had heard in the past, I don't know about this particular time, but when we had the incident with West Nile, after we rode through that issue, which was about 10 years ago, they indicated they had 4 traps.
Okay.
I don't know what they have now, I don't know.
Are the neighborhoods in those direct areas of the traps that have, shown infected mosquitoes, are they notified? I mean, I know the town, all residents have been notified of precautionary measures to take, but is there any special attention to those?
No, what they do is, that's a good indication of maybe where those traps are, is if you hear that they're going to have road spraying. As you probably know, aerial spraying has been cut off completely, but they still do selective roadside truck spraying. And if they spray a certain particular neighborhood, that's probably a good indication, that's been my surmise, guess, that that's probably where one of the traps showed either West Nile virus or EEE.
All right. Thank you.
And aside, you laid out the precautions that we've all been aware of. What should people be following? Is the town gonna, the best way for folks to find out that in fact they can start going out after dusk? And it's kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, you want it to get cold, but on the other hand, that means you can start wearing long, short sleeve shirts again. So what's the, what should we be looking for?
We will post something on our website, and probably, I'm not sure, I'll talk to Mark and Vanessa about maybe putting something out with the town website, with Neil Espasy, like we did earlier, announcing that all public transports are going to be closed. But,
Because right
yeah.
now on the, I'm sorry,
No,
I
that's-
interrupt you. On the town website, there's the top red line. As soon as you go to it, I'm sure you've looked at it, you click on it, and it will bring everything updated that's gone on. Vanessa and I would get, like, I was in on a couple of different conference calls with DPH throughout this, and I would take that information from the conference call, and Vanessa and I would update the latest press release from DPH, as well as, anything that was new. So it's up to date at this point. It still remains the 6P to 6A. When the state determines, as Paul was saying about the frost, they'll notify us in a formal way, and we'll pass that through. the town website, the Board of Health website, and there's also been postings on the public buildings
Great.
as well.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments?
I learned more about mosquitoes this year than
Yeah,
I
bet.
really care to.
All right, thanks for the
Thank you very
work.
much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
the update. I'm going to jump now to other matters properly before the board. And again, we're time constraint with one of the board members, so I wanted to get discussion on these two items kicked off. First, consideration of the draft policy for SME designation of town boards and committees. This is something that had come up about a month ago after a presentation by the EDC requesting this designation. From that discussion, we discussed the development of a policy that the town could implement for SME designation. Mr. Healy has taken the lead on that, and the proposed policy was actually in our packet 2 weeks, for the meeting 2 weeks ago. It was not discussed at the meeting, but at least was put out there for our board to see, for everybody in town to see as well. So I'm going to start with the policy. Mr. Healy, I don't know if you want to just kick it off and discuss the thought process you had in putting this together.
Sure. It starts with the premise that there's a state statute that talks about the ability of various members of boards, commissions, elected and appointed officials in a municipality being able to be designated as what's called special municipal employees. And there's nothing magical about that. It just, if you are a special municipal employee, it means a couple of provisions of the state conflict of interest law don't apply to you anymore. And those specifically have to do with contracting with the municipality and with appearing before other boards and committees in the municipality, boards and committees that you are not a member of. So with a shout out to Mr. Haggerty, he had done some work on this a year or two ago, taking a look at what other towns in the area look like, because when the request came from the EDC, it was very much ad hoc in the Southborough code and otherwise about how we treated boards and commissions and whether or not they were designated as special municipal employees. So jumping off on the work Mr. Haggerty had done, it's hard to research this because you're diving into a bunch of different municipalities, some of whom have okay websites, some of them have websites as good as ours, many of them do not. But was able to get, and they're included in the packet, special employee information from 15 or so municipalities. And what they showed is that it's kind of a mishmash in terms of the way towns treat it. There are a couple that have somewhat formal procedures for the consideration of whether or not an individual or a board or commission is designated a special municipal employee, and that's a decision that resides with the Board of Selectmen in a town like Southborough. And anyone looking through the various materials I put together, everything I looked at, including some information that I got from some residents in the town, I've included as part of the packet. And it's not rocket science, it is just trying to give some structure to any consideration we give, whether it's a request that starts on the outside with a board or commission requesting a designation as special municipal employee, or whether or not it's something, and I think it might be a good idea for us to do this, whether it's something that the Board of Selectmen looks at and says there are any number of boards and commissions that really should be special municipal employees so that they're not burdened, and it is somewhat of a burden, by the inability to perhaps appear before another board or commission because they volunteered for the town. So I try to strike a balance. What it does is, I'll walk through, it's a relatively straightforward 10-step process, acknowledging that under the Mass General laws, that the requirements for a special municipal employee, that the Board of Selectmen can consider classifying various boards, commissions, or individuals as special municipal employees, and then works through what the policy would be. Again, an individual, a board, or commission can come to the Board of Selectmen, or we can initiate it. And then I think the two most important provisions are number 4 in the proposed policy, which that in general, positions, committees, and boards that have the authority to set town policy, have regulatory or quasi-judicial authority, or have appointing authority should not be granted special municipal employee classification. And the reason for that is that I think if you look at the state conflict of interest statute, what they're trying to get at with the provisions that would be exempted from the special municipal employee sections is that rather than somebody having a conflict of interest for an action they take, it's the ability of someone on one board to have undue influence on another board. Sometimes that's termed because they have jurisdictional control over a board or financial control over a board, and that's what I've tried to capture in Section 4. Section 5 is just if there is a particular board that we want to focus on, the sort of factors that you can look at for whether or not a particular set of skills is appropriate, necessary, and in fact, a board might lose out on a skill set if the board is not designated as containing special municipal employees. Finally, as Mr. Cipriano pointed out when he was here a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of meetings ago, the designation doesn't go to an individual, even though an individual can make the request on behalf of the board he or she sits on. The designation goes to the board or committee itself. And again, I think that's because that's a reflection of the fact that it's not an individual conflict of interest provision that the special municipal employee goes towards. It's an influence consideration. And regardless of whether it's person A or person B on a particular board, it's the influence that, the potential influence that being on that board has, not the potential influence that a particular individual has. I think that's what the statute is trying to get at. So that's the proposed policy. Again, all the backup, all the things I looked at are included in there. And I look forward to discussion on it. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's a pretty good start.
Yep. I agree with that. So one thing that I would just note as well, I know that when we did have, when this came up 2 meetings ago, Ms. Braccio had indicated, had requested that we hold off on discussion until tonight because she was unable to make the last meeting. Unfortunately, she was not able to make the meeting tonight as well. I haven't seen, but I have heard that she does have comments and suggestions that she would like to include in this. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels on this, but part of me would like to, out of respect for Ms. Braccio and the concern that she had voiced 2 meetings ago, just give her the opportunity to participate in a discussion on this before we take full action. But all that said, I'll see where everybody else stands on this also.
Yeah, so one thought there is, and of course, I want to know what her comments are too. I mean, I have some questions, and I think it's a really good start. If not, we're there. I just have some questions on some of it, but nothing is written in stone. I mean, just because if we were to approve something tonight, doesn't mean at a follow-on meeting we can't amend anything. We could amend it. In fact, if through our discussion, we may actually hit on some things. Who knows? I don't know what she has in mind, but we may actually hit on them. Or she may say, yeah, actually, folks, what you did makes sense. And, so anyway, my thought is we could still go through we're 4 of us are here. We should go through it. I don't know who's going to be missing next time. And then if we come up with something that we think is reasonable and move forward with it, great. And if we want to further amend it 2 weeks from now, we could do that too. That's my thought.
Yeah, I also am interested in hearing what Ms. Braccio has to say. I guess I don't think it hurts to start talking about some initial reactions this evening and let her watch that on video and catch up next time maybe.
Yep.
But I don't think we ought to do anything official until she gets a chance to weigh in, certainly.
So are there initial thoughts, ideas that you had, that you'd like to offer?
I had a question first, a clarifying question. At first, I think it's a great step to actually make this more explicit and hopefully be more consistent across the town. I think I see three tracks here. One is the value of establishing a more consistent policy so we know and the public knows and the boards know, how we're going to deal with this going forward. I think that's very helpful. Second, I think we need to obviously address the EDC request. And third, I think that it makes sense to whatever we come up with policy to step back and look at all the town boards and designations currently and try to figure out, does what we have make sense and do we need to change more? So I think we're on a good track to do all those things. My question was about language and the thing that you started with, Marty, I think point 4 had regulatory or quasi-judicial authority language in there. Does that mean permitting boards? Because I'm interested in the permitting boards particularly.
Yes.
So that would include ZBA, Planning Board, COMCOM
I mean, we could be
specifically.
explicit about that,
Okay.
for sure.
I think that'd be helpful to clarify that for people, but that one is sensitive for me. And I also like the preamble from Abington and Northfield, which looked like they were cut and paste versions of that, but I thought that was very helpful to set the stage. You'd left a blank for the preamble, so I would suggest we consider that at least, unless there's a better view of it. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is that I didn't see a lot of examples in the ones that you sent around about the considerations that you think of as you make these kind of decisions, a lot of which is somewhat subjective, but I think that it's interesting conversation to say, what do you consider? And I thought a little bit about the kind of things I considered. Some of it's here in terms of, is this a position or are these positions in a particular board that require particularly technical expertise or whatever that is in short supply, and you got to be very careful in terms of finding the right skills in a particular position that may, again, be difficult to come up with, which I think is a consideration for me at least in terms of making these kind of decisions. And that then goes back into the ease or difficulty of filling the positions, which we've struggled with from time to time. I think the other slant that I take on it is looking at the potential for financial gain relative to whatever it is the board does. And if there's a high potential for that, then I think that generates questions on the part of the public to say, is there something going on here that we need to be more careful about, watch more carefully, et cetera. And a degree of public sensitivity to conflict of interest on some of these things. I think we've got a history here of some places people are more concerned about and are more vigilant about in terms of wondering, is the activity of this board something that I have concerns about or not? And in a perfect world, you don't have to worry about that because you get good board members who do the right thing and it's not an issue. But I think that we've got to recognize there is a concern from a number of angles on that. And I don't know how you quantify all of that, and I'm not sure it makes sense to put those kind of things in a list to say, here are the 3 or 4 or 6 factors or whatever that we want to consider. On the other hand, as I think about how I would make a decision on that, those kind of things are bundled in, and ultimately there's a lot of subjectivity in here, and you got to make a call about what you place more weight on or not. So again, I think it's worth a conversation to figure out, how do we consider that? How do we think about it? Do others have those same kind of concerns? One thing that I think is worth clarifying is, I mentioned it last time, Mr. McKay's letter said that the Ethics Commission encourages towns to designate boards as special municipal employees. I actually called the attorney of the day there and was told that, in fact, they do not encourage towns to designate people as special or boards as special municipal employees. What they encourage is that the towns consider carefully, look at the law on this, understand the regulations and what it means, consider the pros and cons very carefully, and then make a decision that works for that particular town. So that's, at least as far as I understand it, the official line, which I think is a very sensible one, and I think that's what we're doing here. So that's sort of where I come down on this, and I've got thoughts in terms of how I'll approach this, and I think it'd be good to talk about that as a group when Ms. Braccio is back. But I think it's a great step, and I encourage us to move forward on it quickly.
Just very, very quickly, three quick things. Number one, I actually thought that one of the most interesting approaches was the town of Sudbury, which I think has got a reputation as a pretty good government town. Their approach, and I'm, I haven't made a final decision yet in terms of how I feel about it, but I'm leaning in the direction that they take, which is they looked at their boards and commissions. This goes to the number question. They looked at their boards and commissions generally and determined that most of them don't have the sort of policy, quasi-judicial, legislative authority that really creates the sort of influence issues that the statute is trying to get at. And as a result, well more than 50% of the towns and boards in the town of Sudbury are special municipal employees. And when you think about, the various boards and commissions we have in the town of Southborough, I think most of them, certainly I think a majority of them, fall into that category. And so I think the idea of identifying what those boards and commissions are, and again, relieving folks of the burden of having to worry about provisions that really shouldn't apply to them, I think would be a helpful step. That's number one. Number two, the money thing of it, this really isn't a money provision, Sam. It's the money provisions are in the other conflict of interest provisions of the Code of Ethics for the Commonwealth. That's what's kind of interesting, odd maybe in some respects about these provisions. They have to do with whether or not you as a member of Board A can appear or represent somebody in front of Board B, over which you're not a member.
Right.
And so if you have a financial interest in something that's going on with your board, it's a completely different provision of the Code of Ethics that applies. So I don't think we have to worry about a financial aspect of this. It just doesn't fit with the statute. The third thing is, I guess, in terms of statutory language, I'm a fan, or this is not a statute, but it'd be a town policy. Everybody has different approaches and feelings. I'm more comfortable with general language that doesn't tie you to a limited set of factors.
Right.
And that's why this tries to lay out sort of general parameters for what we should be thinking about without having a laundry list of things.
I agree with you. I'm troubled by coming up with that kind of list, but I think
Yeah,
that as I
right.
try to think about how I approach it, and I guess I would like to talk at some point more about the money issue, because I think a lot of things ultimately track back to money. Whether it's influence or not, that's often a motivator, but let's have that conversation later.
So,
Thanks.
one of the things that I did like about this is the checks and balances that's almost put in by making it something that's reviewed annually, that there's a schedule to looking at this. There's also the ability to step in, and if we don't like, if the Board of Selectmen doesn't like the way something is going, they can revoke something right away as well. That part of it I like.
The final thing, and I didn't mention this at all, if you look at section 9, none of the towns I looked at had anything like this. So this is my creation. And one of the reasons that people distrust any board or committee or public action, or potentially might, is because there's not transparency. And so what this section 9 does of the proposed policy, which again wasn't gotten from any other town, is it requires that if there is an instance that would otherwise have fallen within the section 20 and section 17, which are the two conflict of interest provisions that are implicated by making somebody a special municipal employee, you're required to make a filing with the town. So there's transparency. Somebody knows that situation existed, and they can raise the issue with the Board of Selectmen that somebody is potentially abusing their status as a special municipal employee, but it requires transparency rather than precluding somebody from participating with another board.
A good ad, good feature, yep.
Yeah. So one of the things as well that when we did discuss this 2 meetings ago that intrigued me was the statement that you made that having a policy like this and granting special municipal employee may actually help people that unknowingly may be in violation of the state law right now, currently. And I guess, can you think of examples and I don't want to throw, and name any throw anybody under the bus. If anybody is, I'll use myself as an example with the work that I did on the Main Street Committee. Like, as an engineer, so I'm a civil engineer. And if I was, say, also representing somebody in front of Conservation Commission for an issue, would I theoretically be in violation of the special municipal employee?
See, that's,
What?
that is probably a problem. That's at least an issue. And it might well be a violation of the law. Again, there's absolutely no connection there. On the one hand, you're serving on a town board looking at a Main Street project. On the other hand, you're an engineer in your private life, and as part of that, you might be appearing before conservation or somebody else, or working with somebody, even not appearing before them, and somehow you find yourself in violation of the state conflict of interest law. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yep.
And so, I mean, that is exactly the point I was trying to make last time, that it's a bit of a trap for people who are unwittingly just doing their normal job and also trying to volunteer for the town.
So thanks for making that point, because quite honestly, I went into the discussion 2 meetings ago, maybe with a little different mindset, but as you made that point clear, I think there is an opportunity for lots of people in town who have lots of talents and a lot to offer that, just are, through their daily lives, may put themselves in a situation where there is a conflict and we're missing out on the opportunity to utilize those talents.
So I completely agree with those remarks, and then, in fact, the one that jumped out at me was Sudbury as well. I mean, that's, to me, seemed to make the most sense, and I do like how you have this laid out. I did have questions on number 4. I think it would be smart for us to actually identify who those are that had regulatory or quasi-judicial authority. I don't want to leave that to chance and someone doesn't really know whether that was them or not. But we could at least give, if we can name them, great, or if we can give some examples. But right now, I mean, to me, the language is fine. It would just help to clarify that a little bit. And then you just answered my question on 9, where that came from. Was that a compilation of things that you've seen in other policies, and then, or do you put that together yourself? I mean, I did see some of these things, but and I guess the second question is it then the SME's obligation? I assume the answer is yes, to make sure that they understand all of what 9 requires them to do, and they know where to go, what to do, what forms to, so what I don't want to do is set something in place that, and then we designate certain, boards and committees as SMEs, and all of a sudden, now they're in violation of 9 because they weren't aware that they had to then weren't trained on it, et cetera.
Where the 9 obviously has 5 subsections, A through E. Each of those 5 things are items in the state conflict of interest law that are prohibited for special municipal employees. So in other words, for regular municipal employees or appointees for boards of commissions. So right now, if you're not a special municipal employee in the town of Southborough and you're a volunteer for a board or commission, it's against the law for you to do any of these things. If you became a special municipal employee, you would now be able to do these things. And what this does is it requires that since you're now able to do these things, you have to disclose it to the town, so there's transparency for the fact that basically it's saying and it's also giving us an opportunity to see if we've erred, perhaps, by granting a particular board or commission special municipal employee status when, gee, it turns out there's 25 instances during a calendar year when there's a potential issue.
Right,
So
that's why I just want to make sure that there's training involved and my guess is for those who are already designated as SMEs, which I think the tree warden and some others from our last discussion already have that status, they may not be following the letter of what is required of them right now because maybe they haven't been trained on it. So anyway, once this is done, I do want to make sure that they're fully trained, and I do like the oversight that we have, that we annually will review it as well.
All right.
Integrity.
Could I ask a clarification too, on that comment?
Yep. That'll come right to you, Jim.
I was interested in Sudbury also, Marty, but one of the things that confused me is Sudbury actually made permitting board special municipal employees, planning board, Board of Appeals, which seems to be at odds with what we proposed here in terms of the quasi-judicial or regulatory board. So I didn't.
I don't have an answer for
couldn't
that.
figure out how that fit.
I don't have an
Yeah.
answer for why Sudbury did what they did,
Okay.
but you're right about that.
I found that a little confusing, but it's worth thinking about more, certainly, so thanks.
Mr. Hagerty?
First of all, I owe your board an apology, Jim Hagerty, Town Clerk. Through my own error oversight, I did not post on time your public packet that was submitted on Friday. You're not required to put that by the open meeting law, but you had submitted it to us. I had processed it with the ADA, and I just literally, I dropped the ball. So that wasn't put up till this afternoon. Your meeting is perfectly in compliance with the open meeting law, but I did not put that up. It was put up this afternoon, so I owe you an apology for that. And the public did not get a chance to see it till today, so that's,
So, and again, this has been up for 2 weeks now. This was in the
Right,
packet from
right, but
2
just saying,
meetings ago.
generally, the packet, that's my bad.
Yep.
Just,
Yep.
no excuse, it just happened. I have a few suggestions and clarifications on number 9 and 10, because they relate to the clerk's office. Just if would, in the interest of time tonight, I'll just send them an email to Mr. Healy then?
It's fine.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, I had a feeling that the ones that require work from the town clerk might have caught your
Oh,
attention.
No, just some clarifications, and if you'd like, picking up on Mr. Calenda's comment about a form, I'll be happy to give you a draft of a form that people could fill out to submit with this as well.
Good deal.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Just quick question, number 10, looked like it was left open as to when the board would annually review these, and I don't know if we thought maybe that's something just to do at the start of each calendar year? Is it something that we should schedule for the second meeting in May, so once a new board is in place, the board could have its input and review of the list? Any-
After town meeting, no budget pressure at that point, so better than January, probably.
Yeah, similarly, I think that's right, the right approach, unless, you know, annually, we go through other appointments, board appointments, and, you know, there could be a designation on that Excel spreadsheet of SMEs, and we can
That's a good
review,
thought as
that's a time where we have to review them anyway.
Yep.
So we do it at that time.
Maybe not a precise date or month or whatever, but as soon as feasible after a certain date or something like that, annually, something like that, to avoid being
Yep.
out of
Yeah.
compliance with a
Maybe we
particular
just
date.
we don't
Yeah, I think
state a date, you know,
Yeah, no,
but
exactly,
annually,
but
we'll do this, and.
tying it to the start of a new fiscal year, or,
Yeah, I think any of the above is fine.
So some flexibility in terms of timing, but it has to be done annually.
all right, so, all this having been said,
I don't think, I mean, it's interesting, it's too bad Mr. McKay isn't here tonight. I suspect he can live for another 2 weeks before getting his answer. So Ms. Braccio was with me at one of the Selectmen's office hours, and she indicated that she was on the, getting ready the next morning to dive into these materials, and I just as a courtesy, I'd like to give her the opportunity to weigh in before we take official action on it.
so I will reach out to her and have her send her comments to Mark. And Mark, if you could then distribute them to Marty, and I guess if you then want to do another draft of this for our meeting in 2 weeks?
Sure.
and-
Sure, I've got notes of what folks said, and we'll give hopefully a relatively modest revision a shot, and maybe have something close to a final product.
Okay, does that work?
What do we, yep, I think that's a good
Good.
idea. What do we do with the request for SME designation? Are we holding on that as well?
I think it would be more prudent to have a policy in place
Mhm.
and then act on their request.
So plan to do that at our next meeting as well?
Yes. Yes.
I think that was a good idea.
I think that makes sense.
All right. Thanks. With that, I am going to go
We may have,
to the top.
no, public comment on it?
I'm going right to public comment next.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Public comment.
Sorry about that.
No issues. Still lit.
Tim Litt, Woodland Road. This is a continuation of the SME discussion, and I'm not going to repeat the emails that I sent on the subject. I did want to point out that, from my point of view, what's important is reducing the barriers to public participation. And Mr. Healy has pointed out, the traps and some of the other issues that arise when you volunteer and you get caught up in this stuff. I did a quick look at our town website this afternoon, and disregarding the dissolved committees and that sort of thing, I found 51 vacancies. Of those, perhaps 15 are committees that I think everyone would agree are inactive or maybe quite don't need them. But that leaves 36 open positions for the town. So I think it's important to act on this, and I think it's important to be as broad as we can responsibly be in terms of providing the SME designation. And finally, I do have reservations about the proposed policy that has individuals or boards self-nominating for the designation, because, as has been pointed out, it's really about the position. It's not about the individuals. So if you have someone who is already on the board and asking for something, well, it probably didn't matter to them in the first place. You're not getting new people in, or they're in violation, which I guess we're not a fix, but we ought to fix it structurally, not based on who's on the committee at the moment, but on what the responsibilities of that committee or board are.
Can I ask, sir, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
And you and I have had some good back and forth about this. But if our board's approach was going to be to look at the boards and commissions generally and make an initial determination that some number of them we thought fit into the category that should be designated as special municipal employee boards and commissions. And so that was done on our initiative, but left open the possibility that another board or commission that wasn't included in that collection could then come forward and try to make their pitch to us. Would you have a better comfort level with something like that?
That doesn't bother me in the sense that that's no different from any other public input to the decisions that your board makes, right? I mean, you look at a problem, you come up with something, and then someone says, hey, you overlooked me, and here are the technical reasons why I think this committee fits in your policy. That works, but enshrining in the policy the notion that you have a primary channel that works around the policy or that's driven by the people who are currently on the board or in the committee, that doesn't feel right to me.
All right, fair enough, thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak about some concerns. Karen Hanlon, Shimkus, Lynbrook Road. I am very concerned when I hear words and phrases like, once this is done, policy in place before we act, because I don't think there's been enough public exposure, as you can see by the empty room. The first publication of this draft policy was several weeks ago in a package that if you didn't know to print it off, you wouldn't even know about it. People are very busy this time of year, as you well know, parents with kids going back to school, and I just think that this needs a complete turnaround and presentation to the public so the voters and the taxpayers understand fully what the sweeping implications of this might be. I don't think anyone can assume that even this board understands what the problem may be or the claim, put before the board and why we might need it. I think we need to spend a lot more time thinking about this, even whether or not we're going to do it, why it may be absurd or we don't need it. the protections offered by existing in-place policies versus coming up with a new policy, and what the downside may be. I have specific concerns just from headlines from the last week. Boston City Councilor calls for a zoning board overhaul, says members shouldn't be dealing in real estate. Ex-Boston zoning board member Galvin approved relief for properties he later helped sell. I'll give these to Ms. Barry so you can look at these. And then here's one, excuse me, let's go back to I believe Mayor Walsh has hired a special prosecutor, federal prosecutor, to look into these issues. And this is, again, the danger of commingling, private interests with public volunteerism. I mean, why do we even need this? We've got plenty of people on committees now that can handle the work. There's one last recent headline that I wasn't going to include, but I will now. It's from the Washington Post, because you mentioned the term quasi-public entities and what can go wrong. Lacking financial savvy, lacking investor scrutiny, embezzlement, steering of lucrative contracts, investigating in tax incentives, lying on applications. I mean, these are things that, when you think about upside, great, but you also have to think about what implications may happen. The concerns that I have, EDC as well as other boards, this is not a matter of a policy and a one-size-fits-all policy. We need more time, more thought put to this. There's a lack of public discussion, lack of awareness, as you can see from the empty room. If we had a town meeting in the fall, that might remedy that. It's found on page, 42 or 43 of a package that I would guarantee you most of the town is just completely unaware of. It wasn't listed on the Board of Selectmen agenda. I'm concerned about mission creep, lack of legal authority, separation of powers between different boards that need to stay clear, crystal clear. And you may look at the documents posted on the advisory board website that speaks to separation of powers. I don't think you can assume that the public knows, or even this board may understand what potential problems may be. What exactly is the claim? I read the letter 3 times, and it doesn't say specifically why it's needed, but it is sort of implied that either you grant the exemption or the applicant must leave the committee. But again, there's plenty of people on the committee to take over any duties or responsibilities, so that's not an issue. What is the problem and what is the downside? Again, we need to spend time thinking about that. Why can this be harmful? SME status is a throwback to when towns were small, okay? And we're more concerned about, kinship problems. This isn't about kinship. This could be about partners in a company, about companies, conflicts of interest. Any rate, colliding interests. You may have unintended results of people acting in the interests of their clients, or maybe even private developers, who within a company, if they're a partner within a company, would act against the interests of their private client. But still, they're trying to serve the public interest. They may not decide in the interest of the public or the town. They may not serve the best interest of the town. These are concerns. In any municipality from Boston out, you can see from these headlines, I mean, this is a problem. They've hired a special federal prosecutor to look at this. Fixers. Do you want people who are serving in these positions who are fixing outcomes for private developers, again, from Boston out. You've got to think about these potential problems. Are you rewarding existing offenders, people who may have already, intentionally or unintentionally, have been engaged in some kind of misconduct? This is not a one-size-fits-all policy. It's a throwback to, bygone days, and I'm arguing that I'm not sure we even need it. It raises serious issues and questions that the public needs to, you need to engage the public on a dialogue. Inside track, undue influence on zoning, conflicts of interest, putting the interests of a private company and their profits in the driver's seat. These are all questions over the town's best interest, over the best interests of the taxpayers. Again, all questions and concerns. 268A, the applicable sections, there needs to be already in place an existing process with meaningful consequences and enforcement, and as a voting, tax-paying member of the public, I'm not even sure what that is. Again, it's about partners in companies, clients of your own, your clients of your partners, and your company. And by the way, there are advantages to keeping the status quo, and that is this. If you keep the status quo, it is a tool to keep municipal employees and volunteers in their lane. It protects the best interests of the public. We can be more ethical than the state. State laws set the base minimum. We can do more in setting our policies. Again, I'm concerned about unintended outcomes, and I will leave these articles with you. This is from the last 3 weeks, okay? And we should pay attention to what's happening with these and the consequences of that. What you're suggesting to me, as a member of the public, results in less transparency, not more. We need more transparency. It opens the door potentially to missteps, miscommunication, and maybe even corruption. This is corruption happening in Boston today. Of the neighbors and friends that I've spoken to, people do not want this. These articles speak to flaws in process and attention that needs to be paid. And, again, the Ethics Committee does not encourage SME designation. And that's really the bottom line.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment? All right, we'll move on to reports. Town Administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of updates. First and foremost, always nice to lead with good news. At the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the EDC downtown overlay district that we were looking to do. There was a grant that was in play. The board had wanted me to check with town council to see if council was able to help craft such a bylaw. I did speak with council. Council said he's, more than willing if we give him a map showing the boundaries and we talk about, what we're looking to accomplish within that bylaw. He's happy to do that. In the interim, Southborough, as I sent out notification to you, Southborough was awarded last week a $50,000 planning assistance grant. Marika and Claire Reynolds and I attended the award ceremony in Salem. Tough place to get to at any time of day, any day of the week.
Can't get back.
But if they're gonna give us money, I'm happy to go. It was, a nice event. They actually had 4 different grant opportunities from different divisions being awarded on the same day, over $13 million in grants. As I believe Mr. Healy pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, some significant money for some of the park grants. So that's something I think we'll look for in the future. But $50,000 which is going to help the committee to support the downtown initiative for planning, take a look at bringing somebody in to help look at what we can do to achieve, you know, what we're looking to do in terms of the discussion we had of an overlay district, and maybe look at the possibility of the National Grid parcel and what possibly could be done with that, wastewater, parking, things of that nature. To that end, I've also spoken with Representative Dykema's office. She is looking to set up a meeting with National Grid so that we can have a conversation about that property. But before I get away from the grant, I do want to acknowledge the work that Claire Reynolds did to put this together. Excuse me, I think it was, you know, you say it's well done, but obviously it was done well enough that, you know, that it was able to get us this money, I think. So that's a great boost for EDC and for the town to be able to, you know, help us to move this process forward. On the Pine Hill improvements, the board had voted at the last meeting. I did speak with Ms. Galligan. She is talking with, excuse me, the painting company for putting the double yellow on the road. Right now, it's starting to get touch and go in terms of weather and temperature for that work to get done. We're hoping we can get that done before the season closes out on that. I will keep you posted. The signs for the traffic calming have been ordered, and Ms. Galligan will be on an agenda upcoming to report on the traffic counts and how those came out in terms of a three-way stop, which I know we had discussed at a previous meeting. Also, and finally, this week, I had sent the board a letter, forwarded you a letter from advisory that was given stating their support for a meals tax here in Southborough. They're seeking the board's support to put an article on the warrant for that, and would like the board to try and get them on an upcoming agenda to have a discussion about that. Obviously, I think then, you know, we'd include EDC in that discussion so we can have a balanced discussion, you know, on the issues. So I just put that out there, not for discussion purposes, but more for scheduling purposes. So I will work with the chair to try and get that on an upcoming agenda for discussion. Okay. That's all I have.
Good, thank you. A couple things that I just wanted to make note of. First, similar to the vacancy that we had on the Assabet School Committee, one of the elected positions in town, there's a vacancy on the Board of Library Trustees that needs to be filled. So that is currently advertised. I just wanted to call attention to that. I know that the Board of Library Trustees has reached out and started to solicit interest from the public for that open position as well. I will reach out to the interim chair of the Board of the Library Trustees to try and agree on a date that we may want to set to end that advertisement period, if you will, see what applicants we get. And then, similar to what we did with the Southborough School Committee, we will meet jointly with the library trustees to fill that vacancy. The vacancy will be filled for the until the next annual election in May of 2020, at which time there will be an election for the remainder of that term, which I believe is 2-year after that. So that's a joint meeting that we'll have upcoming. Just wanted to note, again, there are a number of vacancies that we have that are all advertised on our website. 2 chairs have reached out to me to draw particular interest to openings that they have on their committees, so I just wanted to make special note of the vacancy on the Municipal Technology Committee and also for the ZBA alternate position. The last thing that I have is, well, 2 more things. Under consent agenda, we do have the 1-year extension for New England Golf to manage the golf course. Hopefully the board will act to approve that. And as the board had unanimously wanted to do, I had a meeting with Mr. Harrison, the owner of New England Golf, to try and come up with a special event that we could have at the golf course. You know, A, to recognize the improvements that we have recently completed there, but also in an effort to enhance the publication of the course, the people's playing of the course. So we have come to an agreement of what we're going to do on Heritage Day weekend this year, and we'll see if it continues into the future. I think it'd be a great idea if it could. But on Heritage Day weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the fee to play golf will be set at $5 per person. And the hope is that people will donate the balance of what the normal greens fees would be, plus any other donation that they want to make to support the ALS One Foundation. I know two key people that were instrumental in the golf course continuing were John Wilson and Brian Schifrin. Obviously, ALS One has afflicted both of those, impacted both of those families, and we just thought that this would be a good way to set a low greens fee to get people to come out to the course, see the course, play the course, but in so doing benefit an organization that is doing so much to put an end to that terrible disease. And I thought it would be a good tribute with the efforts that Mr. Schifrin and Mr. Wilson put into seeing golf course continue. So New England Golf was very, very supportive of that idea as well. So we will be advertising this in the time ahead and encourage everybody to save time in their weekends to come on out and play golf and support a great cause over Heritage Day weekend. And a couple weeks after Heritage Day weekend, we'll be having the ribbon cutting ceremony at the Public Safety Building facility. More information on that will follow. I'll reach out to Mr. Malinowski to work with him on planning the day's events there, but so lots of good things to look forward to at the Public Safety facility and on the golf course. Hopefully we get good weather over Heritage Day weekend, and with a lot of people still in town to take advantage of the Heritage Day activities, we hope that they make golf a part of that as well. So that's all I have. Any other updates?
Very quickly, well, first of all, kudos to you and the golf management company. That's a great idea, and I'm not a golfer, but I'll figure out a way to make a donation. Mr. McKay was not here when we started, but he's here now, member of the EDC. Congratulations on the grant. And you and Ms. Connolly and the other members of the EDC had the good judgment to select Ms. Reynolds as the scrivener for the grant proposal, and it was very successful. So I hope you feel a little bit of momentum for what you folks have been trying to get going in the Main Street initiative. I think this is it's a great plus. The next thing is. There's only 3 of us here now, so maybe it's best discussed at the next, make it an agenda item on the next meeting. We've just run into some thorny logistical issues on the pilot discussions with St. Mark's and the Fay School, primarily, others involved as well, and having nothing to do with them, but having to do with the requirements of the open meetings law on our side. And so rather than get into great detail about that, I've had some very, very pleasant discussions with the heads of school for both St. Mark's and the Fay School, and they've been very accommodating for what we want to do, which is to sit down with them and to talk about some issues. The problem now is on our side, just from a logistical standpoint. So why don't we put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and we can try to make some sense of those logistical issues and make them jive with the open meetings law. And I guess the final thing is, just one of the emails we got is I think I'm going to be able to make it on Friday, October 4th, is the ribbon cutting ceremony for the Burroughs Loop Trail. And I know we've had the trail folks in at a couple of our meetings, and I've been incredibly impressed with the work they've done, both in the town of Southborough, but obviously in conjunction with with our neighboring towns. And it's over Algonquin. It's from 3 to 4 o'clock. Local dignitaries, not me, but real local dignitaries, will be there. And then I think there's going to be a half-hour hike for parts of the new trail afterwards. So if folks are around and available on Friday afternoon, I think that's a pretty good event to attend. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I have a few things too. Again, kudos to the EDC, the grant, great news, and good news about the golf course event. And hopefully that's popular and can be continued into future years, because I think it'd be a great deal for many purposes there. And a kickstart maybe in terms of the reopening of the course, et cetera, which would be great, because if we can get more rounds out of that, it's a relatively fixed cost operation, a lot of that flows through the bottom line, so that would be very helpful. Several things. I've actually been thinking some more about the Pine Hill traffic control, as well as other roads in town that have the same issue, and I've come up with a few things I'd like to get into the mix. I'll just mention them here. I'm going to pass them along to Karen Galligan for consideration. A couple of them are for us to think about. We talked previously about adopting or accepting Chapter 90, Section 18B, or excuse me, Section 17C, which is allowing the town to set 25-mile-an-hour speed limit in thickly settled areas. Turns out there's another state law, Chapter 90, Section 18B, that would allow the town to declare safety zones, which are nebulously defined, which sounds to me like we would have a fair amount of latitude with that, and set a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in those safety zones. So I would suggest we think about both of those options. Not clear exactly, what makes sense where, but having more tools is a good thing, I think. Also, it turns out that some towns use what they call stealth radar, which is a radar unit about the size of a briefcase that actually tracks speeds and time in various locations, and uses that data to help schedule enforcement activities. So it turns out if there's an individual who drives 150 miles an hour down the road at 8 o'clock every morning, it allows the police to figure out maybe we ought to have somebody there with a radar gun at that time. So it's a helpful thing in terms of data for targeted enforcement, because we simply don't have the resources to have enforcement 24/7 in all these places. So I would urge us to consider something like that. I've looked into speed bumps a little bit, and it turns out that there are speed-sensitive speed bumps. It's pretty interesting. I guess they're used in Europe in some places. There's a concept called non-Newtonian fluid, which I wasn't aware of, which is basically fluid that is either liquid or solid, depending on the amount of stress that you put on it. So if you have a bucket of this stuff, you put your finger in, it's a liquid. If you hit it with your fist, it's a solid, because the dynamic of the fluid changes there, and it adheres the fluid. So people actually fill a speed bump-like bladder, put it on the road, and you can tune it. You can get fluid that if a vehicle hits it with 30 miles an hour or less force, and you can pick the speed you want, it squishes out and the vehicle doesn't feel the bump. If you hit it at 50 miles an hour, you hit a solid bump there, and it gives you a jolt. So that's an issue certainly for things like snow plowing, for example, but again, I think that's something that might be interesting to consider as an option that would allow us to get some more tools to control speed. I had an opportunity to go to a couple of meetings for the Mass Municipal Association, and one, too bad Ms. Braccio is not here, she and I attended one on housing choice. There's a very active push in the legislature this year for the Housing Choice Initiative, as it's described. Goal is to improve the diversity of housing, and the impact of this would be, if it's passed, would be to change the vote required at town meeting to change zoning bylaws from a 2/3 vote today to a majority vote for a specific set of things, like dimensional requirements, mixed use, parking requirements, adopting open space residential development bylaws, adopting 40R smart growth bylaws, allowing accessory apartments, all aimed at increasing diversity of housing. This is a pretty interesting thing, and there's a fair amount of difference of opinion about this. Clearly, housing diversity is important. I certainly support that. On the other hand, it does change the dynamics of local control of that process. And so my question is that something that this town, this board wants to weigh in on and make a request of our legislators to either support or not support that? I think that's an interesting topic, because that's something that could have a significant impact on the town if that happens. Another thing that I heard about recently is that there's something going on with the cable access fees that support Southborough Access Media. And I know their board is aware of this, but as technology changes for less content flowing through the traditional cable folks and more for streaming content, the towns get less money from the streaming process. Internet is excluded from those payments that flow to Southborough Access Media. This is an FCC regulation, but again, there's a move afoot to try to squeeze the legislatures collectively to change some of that and preserve access to those fundings for public access television. I think that's an important communication mechanism for the town, and I think that it might be worth thinking about how we might add a little push to that one. Reinforcing what has been commented here before, Mark made a good point. There's a lot of grant money out there for a variety of things. I keep listening to towns getting grants for all sorts of things, and it seems to me that there's an interesting opportunity to find a way to get into the budget a part-time grant writer. There are people out there who are actually very skilled at writing grants, know where the money is, know what to apply for. I think there could be a handful of things that we might select for focus for that kind of thing, in terms of, we've heard about some of them, sidewalks, trails, walkability, parks, water infrastructure. There's some money for that out there, I hear. Historic records preservation. The community compact folks just opened up a grant process, application process for technology, up to $200,000 worth of grants. We've done well with weatherproofing and insulation. Town clerk has been focusing on document scanning and retrieval kind of things. So to me, I think you get the right person there, they could return multiples of their salary in terms of grant support for things that would be difficult to support in the normal budget process. So I would encourage us to think about that at least, because I hear a lot of towns saying that they've been very successful with these kind of grants. And typically the kind of comment is, we found somebody who's really good at this. We didn't sort of use the usual, internal staff who is successful in certain areas. We've done very well, for example, in public safety grants through our fire department, got some real expertise there, and it would be great to try to apply that in some other areas as well. And finally, had a very interesting opportunity last week or so to do school tours. We were pleased that the superintendent arranged to show some of us around Fenn, Woodward, and Algonquin. And a lot of exciting things going on there. Shout out to those folks. Looks like it's, again, great operation, and always a pleasure to see what's going on in the schools. A lot of enthusiasm. This was in the evening, a lot of programs happening. Kids were running around doing all sorts of things that appeared to be very energetic. So I think we can continue to be proud of the job that the schools do, and I appreciate the chance to go through and see some of that. So that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Consent agenda, we have 4 items. Anybody have questions or want to hold any of the 4?
I do not.
Okay,
Nope.
I will make a motion to approve the 4 items on the consent agenda. Item A, approval of regular session minutes, September 17th, 2019. B, accept donation of $28 for Southborough Youth and Family Services. C, authorize chairman to accept renewal pricing for a municipal aggregation program. D, approval of 1-year extension for New England Golf to manage golf course. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Brian, can I ask a question about one of those clarification?
Yep.
On the municipal aggregation thing, I saw that was very time sensitive. You got a limited time to make a decision on that. Is that something, if you actually see a rate that for whatever reason you're not comfortable with, can you say, I'm going to pass on that and we'll try again tomorrow or the next week or whatever? If you knew, for example, that rates were trending down, would you have an opportunity to hold on that for some period of time?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yep, we will do that.
Okay, thanks.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Before we do, Mr. McKay was not here. He might not realize that we jumped his matter ahead. He wasn't here when we did that. You don't realize that, do you?
I do.
You do.
I
Okay.
ran into Mr. Kalenda just as I was coming in from the parking lot, and I
Okay.
apologize that I
Nope.
was on the late side. I
No.
thought it would be much later when you got to.
No worries. And again, Mr. Kalenda needed to bug out, so we wanted to make sure that he got involved in that discussion as well. So I did juggle the agenda accordingly, so
Okay.
he was able to participate in the discussion, and I think we're well on our way towards, well, we have a draft policy in place. We had good discussion on that. Mr. Healy is going to incorporate comments that were voiced tonight.
Maybe.
Or
No,
at least my comments.
That's
were
right.
voiced
The ones he likes.
and put forth an updated version that we will take under further consideration at our meeting in 2 weeks. So, and
So
at
the-
that time, if there is action on that policy, the plan would also be to include action on the EDC's request for for designation at the meeting in 2 weeks as well.
Okay.
yeah, I know we kicked you 2 weeks before, and we're doing it again, and
Yeah.
hopefully you can live with that.
I will.
You know, and again,
I can live with that,
unfortunately-
and I'm happy.
Braccio couldn't be here tonight, and out of respect for her, we know that she did have comments and input that she wanted to make, so we wanted to hear that as well.
I appreciate that, and I'm happy to, I'll admit, I didn't get to hear that discussion. I was a little disturbed by some of the comments, public comment that I heard later in the meeting. I did catch some of that, but I'm happy to reserve that discussion and those comments until the next meeting.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.